Well, welcome back. Hopefully you've enjoyed the day thus far, had a good lunch. Now we'll settle into the afternoon. We're going to spend the next hour discussing how companies can deal with the rapid pace of change brought on by technology. So we all talk a lot about digital transformation. Sort of this will be the token, business digital transformation session. We called the session The New Rules of Business Engagement. And we talk about engagement today. We're going to talk about engagement with our employees, both our current employees, our future employees, our customers, our partners, the startup ecosystem. So really engaging with all these various constituencies that our companies need to work with. On engagement, we hope throughout the session, this is meant to be interactive, so we're not going to wait until the end for Q&A. So if at any point you have any questions, please raise your hand. We'll get a mic over to you. We're going to invite the panelists up to the stage now, and if you panelists can join us. And as many of you have probably participated in digital transformation sessions, I've tasked to make sure the group, we really push the boundaries, we really explore some new areas that you may not have heard before on other sessions. So I'll start by introducing the group. To my right, we have Blake Irving, who's the CEO of GoDaddy. Prior to GoDaddy, he was the EVP and Chief Product Officer at Yahoo. Prior to Yahoo, he spent 15 years at Microsoft. We have Paul Daugherty, who's the Accenture's Chief Technology Officer and leads the company's technology innovation and ecosystem group. We have Lorraine Bolsinger, who's heading up GE's Corporate Leadership Acceleration Program. And prior to this role, she was the president and CEO of GE Power, distributed power business, as well as president and CEO of GE Aviation Systems. And finally, we have Kevin Bandy, who's Cisco's Chief Digital Officer and leads the company's digital portfolio growth efforts working across the organization. So I want to start with Paul, as sort of Accenture sits at a unique position that companies are coming to you trying to deal with this issue of digital transformation. Talk a little about sort of what you're hearing. What are the big challenges? What are what's motivating these companies to really go through the transformation? And talk a little about the tech trends they're asking about most.
Yeah, no, we see a lot of patterns across the industries when you look at it, but things evolving at an uneven pace. And so maybe three areas that I'd talk about that are really common discussion points that we have with senior executives and in the programs that we work on. One is the change. I think everybody at this point knows they need to transform. The CEOs, the boards, and the senior management knows that they need to change. Digital transformation is here. The question is, what do they do? And there's three areas that we hear about very commonly. The first is, how do we change the commercial model? And that's the shift to more of an outcome-driven as a service model. That we see, really in really interesting ways evolving in big companies. We've heard about it from some of the companies in the room. Philips, I think, is a good example with outcome-driven health models. Carbon 3D is a company that has a very innovative company doing additive manufacturing, but their view is the technology moves so fast they can't sell the additive manufacturing machines. They have to sell it as a service, and they'll keep swapping out the machines continually as it innovates. So that's the kind of thinking on just very different commercial models as companies digitally transform. Second area is the new business models where it's generally focused on this idea of platforms. We heard from Ford about the car as a platform. And we heard from Bill Rue, GE, the work that they're doing around Predix and platform-based business models. And that's a challenge for a lot of companies because the skills you need to build a platform are very different than what they've done historically, becoming a software company, et cetera. So a lot of activity in that area, that area around business models. The third area is then around an area I generally call liquid workforces. How do you change the culture in the organization, and how do you adapt to very different workforce demographics that we started to talk about here at Techonomy with some of the changes that are happening in the workforce, and things like about 50% in the U.S., about 50% of the workforce is going to be contingent labor within a couple of years. And what does that mean in terms of how you source expertise, and how do you use crowdsource models in the way I think Stitch Fix is here, the way they're using it in sourcing design expertise into the kind of business model they have in the retail industry. So that's a really big challenge, and we see that one in our business where we have 380,000 employees, and we're looking at it saying we don't need to have that many employees. We can source the people and source the labor in very different ways, and that's a common theme with our clients. And I'll just say, I'd wrap it all up and say, I think we're kind of at a point where you can rethink just what a corporation is. And that's, I think some of the discussion on AI and where it's going and all these other changes, we're operating in companies that generally were configured for an era of hierarchical work structures, timed and measured processes, and control of a very specific form of intellectual property. And I'd submit that we're just at the front end of rethinking what a corporation looks like to really respond to these changes.
So Lorraine, Paul mentioned sort of the workforce and the changing nature of work. In your role at GE, you're obviously thinking about how do we cultivate, leaders for this digital transformation? How do we prepare them? Obviously, the workforce will continue to change. Talk a little about sort of what the program is, how that works across the organization.
Sure. So, Josh, I want to quote something that you said in your letter to all the participants, that every company is a technology company. Well, I would go one step farther and say every function is a technology function. Every role is a technology role in the New World Order. I mean, as a company, we know how to do industrial really well. We've been doing it for 130 years. We have millions of physical assets out in the world. People know how to design them. Every 20 seconds, a GE engine takes off on an airplane. 2/3 of the world is powered by GE power. So we got the physical side down pat. The digital side is different for us. And Bill talked a little bit about it yesterday. And the challenge to teach old dogs new tricks, and I'm one of those old dogs, is hard. So when we think about, as we're designing this program that's going to create our next generation of leaders in the company, I'm talking about executive level leaders. These are people with deep domain expertise. They understand those physical assets really well. But now we need to teach them that other side, right? It's kind of a little bit of left brain, right brain. And what I heard, especially in this first class, first of all, they love working on digital projects. Every one of them has an assignment that has a digital element to it. Every one of them has to work on a project that does the same. So that's kind of by mandate. But they're interested in this work. But they say, teach me. What does it mean? And what I finally have come to grips with after 6 months of trying to teach them that, we have a massive open online course that they've taken. We've taught them all how to code. Now, not to be coders. They took a 2-hour class. But I wanted them to not think of it as something abstract, something that you guys do, but we don't do, right? Get your hands a little bit dirty, and then it's familiar, so it's not so scary. And I think there's something to that, and they feel more comfortable. But the next piece of that is getting them they have to do it in the job. Nobody's coming with pixie dust of digital and sprinkles it on you and you're suddenly a digital person. You've got to dig in and figure out how I use data science. I just had a review. I'm going through all the businesses, and they tell me about their assignments and their projects. So just 2 weeks ago, a young guy who'd worked in sourcing for about 6 years, so he'd be about 28 years old. He was working on a digital project, data mining, for sourcing. He's a very good sourcing guy, traditionally trained, functionally very good. He started playing with some data, mined the data, found $25 million, and forget what the project is, just trust me on this, found something that was an anomaly and said, I think I can do something with this. So he had pattern recognition, was able to use that data to figure out how to save the company $25 million. He's 28 years old.
Yeah.
Right? The chances of him saving $25 million in the company in the old-fashioned way of doing sourcing is probably pretty slim. Maybe over his lifetime he might have done that. So it's the democratization of data, of knowledge, of this domain that used to take 30 years. Right? We said you can't be that kind of leader until you've worked for 30 years because you couldn't possibly understand how to design a high-pressure turbine gas path component. Today, you can learn that faster. And that's the beauty of it.
And, Kevin, we talk about, all the time that this has to come top down. It has to be through the organization, this digital transformation. Obviously, Cisco, Chuck's about a year into the job. How is, Chuck's approach as a sort of leader of the organization and sort of bringing you in to really go through this transformation? I mean, how do you work with the business leaders? Do you need that? Obviously, you need that buy-in, but how has he empowered you to really make these changes?
I think it starts with, so Chuck has been in role, and Chuck replaced John, who had been there for 25 years, from $400 million to $50 billion. That was John's reign. And when you begin to look at it, 80% of the world's network traffic crosses Cisco. And you talk about, teaching old dogs new tricks. Growth was not a problem for Cisco, but the business model that Paul talks about was upon us. It was right in front of us. because when you talk about software-defined networking or moving towards consumption across networking in 80% of the world, including military, states, countries, running on your infrastructure, you're talking about them changing. So the change has to be viewed in both. And Chuck asked me two particular questions. Where's technology going, and what are the implications to business? So when he took over as CEO, that's what he was asking, because he started asking himself, has Cisco been defining the markets, or have they been playing in the markets? And then, John sort of coined the phrase, you're either disrupted, you either control your disruption, or you will be disrupted. And I think that is a legitimate piece that we in management all across this digital age have to embrace. And so when I took over, Chuck literally painted no boundaries that I could not confront. So I cut across every single ELT leader that there is, all the way down through the entirety of the organization, to redefine what Cisco is going to be. And when I came in, one of the things that I recognized is, just as you talk about what's the trap value that's in the business, you find that $25 million. We found billions of dollars. We found billions of dollars when we began to look at our business, not as a hardware company, but how would our customers begin to consume it very differently. Because as you evolve, you can't move towards a consumption company and just apply all your hardware methodologies towards a consumption company. And so we literally have been re-engineering all the way from product introduction through policy orchestration, through process orchestration, all the way through the business. And only then do we begin to change the behaviors associated with our labor.
And, so far, right, we have big companies, Cisco, GE. Blake, you primarily serve the SMB market. How, is the SMB market thinking differently about digital transformation than maybe some of these larger organizations are thinking about it?
Yes. So SMBs mean a lot of different things, a lot of different companies. Microsoft, Google, most companies think of SMBs as 200 people or less. We service customers mostly of 5 individuals in the business or less. And if you think about America, today, 85% of small businesses in the United States are 5 people or less. 75% of them are sole proprietorships. Mm-hmm. You asked them if they were going digital, they would look at you like, what the hell are you talking about? I paint houses. I'm a window washer. I make belts, very, very tiny businesses. And what digital can do for them, and what digital is doing for them, and I think probably 70% of our customers, our 15 million customers are here in the U.S., is allowing them to acquire customers, retain customers, get analytics about how their business is doing, allowing them to have a back office that makes them feel like they can play against other people that are much larger in their particular business, and have a closer connection to their customers so they can actually work on the craft or the passion that they chose, or the thing that they ended up doing because they figured out how to make money, doing just that. So we provide services that help them get online, become digital, acquire customers, send email marketing, show up high in a Google search ranking, because that's marketing to these guys, and then make sure that they're running a back office that makes them look professional, showing up in an inbox with a URL that looks professional, and then giving them enough business intelligence, the same kind of things that my colleagues up here are talking about, that gives them analytics on their business when they really don't even know what analytics are. But if you can tell me what somebody across the country is doing that's in the same business that I am, and why they have more customers than I do, or how their average revenue per user is better, now I've got a data mine that actually matters to me. And if you can make that look really pretty in pictures and graphs, sort of the way the Tableau does this today, in a really simple way, because I just wash windows, then you actually have broken some codes.
And sort of, one of the themes we've continued to talk about, obviously, as this digital transformation happens, is AI. And like one of the things we talked about is customer service. And with a lot of companies have moved towards chatbots, have moved towards email-only interaction, have used to leverage the digital tools and sort of remove themselves from what customer service was. At GoDaddy, you've taken a different approach from how you use technology to serve these customers.
Yeah.
Talk a little about sort of, that approach.
Yeah, so we have a very different approach than most tech companies. We consider ourselves to be a tech a tech company with a very human touch. Most of our employees are on phones servicing these small businesses because, being an entrepreneur, and when I say entrepreneur, I don't mean, Mark Zuckerberg, I'm going to make billions of dollars. I run my own business. I can feed my family. I'm a tight part of the community. It's a super emotional ride for these guys. And when they are having a problem in their business, whether it's digital or not, or I can't get my iPhone to sync with, my mail, they want to talk to somebody. So we have chosen to automate the systems that humans use to make sure that the data that we have on a website that a human's going to interact with from their PC or their phone, and the individual that they're going to act with when somebody picks up a phone and calls, and we do about 1.5 million calls a month with our customers, that they feel loved, that they feel taken care of. We don't hold a clock to them. They want to talk to a human. Even on chat today, they want to make sure that it's a person. And honestly, there's a couple of really good articles that are written about chatbots and how when the chatbot is trying to act as human as possible, and then all of a sudden it breaks down and it gives you an answer that is far afield of what it should have said, they want a human to be there. So that sort of continuum of, I'm on your website, I can't understand something, I'm trying to achieve something in business, I really want to talk to somebody, they better be real, and they better be compassionate, and they better understand my emotion, talk me off the cliff, and you can talk to a whole bunch of folks about our customer service, but we don't care how long they're on the phone with somebody. We just want them to solve the problem and have that turn into a recommendation.
David, who I think he was sitting here a couple minutes, was raving again about Elena. His wife has a small business and used GoDaddy and the amount of time he spent on the phone. But Paul, as we talk about digital transformation and people think that means just applying technologies to solve the problems, and especially in the AI case, do you see the people losing sight of that human element and the role that employee will play in being enhanced by technology? Are they looking for AI to replace the people, or in the organizations you're talking to, they understand it's really complementary to the workforce?
I think we've had a lot of maybe too much focus in the way we pursued automation in the past, just generally speaking in the industry, on replacing. And I think the view we're taking is we talk a lot is a people-first approach, and looking at how do we give people the best tools, whether they be consumers or whether they be the employees to do their jobs more effectively. But I do think customers and people and citizens want effective access to things and information. So they do want humans in some cases, but a lot of times they just want things. They want information or services more effectively. And the technology is getting a lot better, so we can do more and more with chatbots and AI and better automated approaches, and we can sense sentiment in various things. One example I'll give you is for a large European social services agency, the biggest issue they had was engagement with senior citizens across many languages spoken in this one particular country. And they couldn't get the right match, the right people in all the different languages to really support the kinds of questions they were getting from this constituency and their population. So we developed a artificial intelligence-based agent, natural language, voice and text processing type of application that was able to interact and answer the questions very effectively, and customer satisfaction levels from this group that wasn't happy with their service went up dramatically, dealing with the automated capability in that case. So I don't disagree. I think there are things where you want real people there, but I think there's ways to apply the technology to serve customers very effectively. And then the key thing we believe is, how do you then adjust the role of the people so that they're doing the right things? And you won't be able to have the automated systems solve everything. So how do you then allow collaboration between the person and the machine or the software to answer the question the right way? And there's a lot of good things happening in that space too.
So Kevin, we talked about obviously adapting the business models, taking on the technology is going to change how you deliver services. One thing I think we talked about on the phone was that's all well and fine if we want to change our model to a service model, to an OpEx versus CapEx. But the customers also have to be willing to make that change, to accept those services differently, pay for them differently. So how is Cisco sort of, again, working, or how do you see organizations working with their clients? So it's not about only their digital transformation internally, right? It's about helping their clients go through that transformation as well.
This builds on your past question, and also the previous dialogue is, when I came in, Cisco was saying they're going to become a software company. And I was like, and I've had conversations with many companies that believe they're going to become a software company. And I say, you're either born a software company or you're not. You don't just migrate to become one. And I said, ultimately what we're trying to pursue in today's digital economy is to where the customer is in control of their choice, how they want to procure something. And that meant that we had to fundamentally alter how we were developing and presenting the entirety of Cisco's portfolio to where people around the globe, you see variations by industry and by region as to if they want it in a CapEx or OpEx-based model. That means that the scrutiny by which you build standards into your portfolio is very, very demanding. But when we present that, we're seeing customers truly begin to do that. And what the ultimate outcome that Cisco's looking for is we've had to alter our portfolio and how we develop it so they control their own digital transformation. It's not us as a technology company to determine when they begin to execute their own transformation. Do we have to alter our portfolio so that they actually enable it? Yes. And if you look at artificial intelligence, we're literally building self-learning networks now that are running that artificial intelligence. And if you look, we actually now have built contextual workflow directly into the network. So that artificial intelligence is becoming analytically astute and being wrapped around with security. So you have pervasive analytics and pervasive security in the self-learning networks now. That is radically different than how Cisco has thought about the need of the network in the past.
Great. I think we have a question down here. Looks like Josh.
Yes, Josh Reynolds with Quantifind. Listening to the discussion that's happening right now about the benefits of artificial intelligence and the payoff that you get from being able to streamline operational and automate a lot of things, I wanted to bring up the other side of it, which is artificial intelligence also runs a risk of taking humans out of the loop at really important points. Lorraine, listening to you talk about the meritocracy that appears to be in place at GE, and the fact that your story involved bringing a human into the loop. So the reason I ask the question is I work for a company that believes very much that it's about intelligence augmentation, not artificial intelligence. That teaching a computer to think like a human, at last year's Techonomy, that discussion happened, and the conclusion was it was dumb to teach a computer to think like a human being because we have a lot of human beings that do that quite well already. So I guess, Lorraine, my question first to you and open to others on the panel is, what's your view on intelligence augmentation, and how do you make sure that you keep a human in the loop at the right points?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it speaks to the two different halves of how we use digital. So I think you'll hear a lot of companies, and I think it's easy to understand, using all things digital for productivity. So that's making your backroom operations better. It's bringing intelligence faster. You know, I think about just last week I was at one of our operations, and they had folks who were doing something called revenue recognition, RevRecs and Rev reconciliation. It is the most god-awful job in the world, and we have highly paid finance people who went to college to be, you know, brilliant folks doing the most awful work in the world. They've figured out how to use robots to do that instead. And in fact, they were the ones who figured that out. So you might say, didn't they just obsolete their jobs? No, because we have 10 other jobs for them to do, all of which are creative, interesting, innovative, which is the flip side. And that's where I think you're going with this. How do you use all the digital tools to do more outcome selling? How do you do revenue marketing? I know a young gal who came up with this wonderful way of reaching our customers, of which there are millions and millions of customers. How do you mine that database to now say, we're going to retool our sales force to be able to go after those best opportunities? That's the innovative side. That's where the AI helps you think about where you should be going rather than how to do what you did in the past better. I love both halves, and I said earlier, right brain, left brain, and that's what it is. So those right brain guys who want to, you know, kind of fix the back room, we love them because they'll find the $25 million in sourcing. But on the other hand, we'll have the folks who are thinking about how we can do revenue generation and maybe come up with the next $100 million customer that we haven't acquired today. So I think it isn't one or the other. It really is both. But freeing those people from the mind-numbing jobs to do really interesting work, I think, is what's key.
I'll give you just my two quick points. I was in a conversation on Monday or Tuesday down in Cancun, and the theme of what I talked about was reimagining work and reimagining the value. And what I find a lot of leaders do today is they try to deploy technology to automate things, but they don't redefine the work in itself. They claim the incremental results, but they never redefine what the entirety is of what they're after. And when you do that, it's a disservice to the employees because, and Paul said it, as you automate things, you should be learning from it. Lorraine said it. AI is providing intelligence and analytics by which you redefine the work that the employees are doing. So much of your value is tied up in those employees, but if you don't fundamentally redefine the work and redefine the growth strategy associated, which is digital, that's a growth strategy. It's not a cost strategy. You're doing a disservice to running the company.
Yeah, just come at the question a little bit of a different way. I agree with that perspective, and I completely agree with the intelligent augmentation, kind of approach to things. It's very, very much where we're headed. But I think we're kind of at a bad state in some ways with how we've approached it to date. As Kevin just said, so I think we have all this debate around, do we want machines to run the world? I think we'll look back at it 7 years ago and say, or 7 years from now, and we'll say machines were running the world 7 years ago. It was just dumb machines doing it in a bad way that are subjugating people to tasks that aren't rewarding and are somewhat menial. And I think the real opportunity for us with artificial intelligence and smarter technologies to better match smarter machines, to allow people to be smarter, more creative, and better use their intellect and true capabilities. So we don't want machines running the world. We want the right match between people and software and intelligent capability. But you just think about an example of the person who checks you out at a big box store, who takes the items out of your cart for you, scans them in an OCR scanner. When they're done, they look at the cash register, they tell you the total, you hand them a card, and they swipe your card. Is that a rewarding human task? Or an Uber driver who goes where the phone tells them to go to pick up a customer and then follows the map religiously to drop you off. Those are transitional jobs that aren't automated in a particularly great way for humans. And I think our opportunity is to look at how do we use smarter technology to automate things in a way that truly allows people to work at the right level and transforms processes, like reimagine the processes to put humans in the loop in the right way, and reimagine the human interface using all the technology we're talking about, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, gesture-based computing, et cetera. So the machines operate at a human level. We don't have to waste 50% of our cognitive capability trying to type on keyboards and with our thumbs on phones or what have you. That isn't really an effective way to communicate. So that's why I'm optimistic about it. I think there's tremendous potential to move from a very primitive way that we've structured automation to a more advanced form.
But the tasks you just mentioned, right? So we're talking about certain tasks that could be automated. Yesterday, with Ray Kurzweil and Vivienne Ming, they talked about artificial intelligence. And Lorraine, you mentioned something about teaching people to code, and they wanted to code. Vivienne and I were talking. She would argue that coding is a stopgap, right? At some point, you're going to have someone say to an AI, I want an app that pulls data from Facebook using Python and gives me access to this insight, and the AI is going to write the lines of code, right? So we're talking about training people to be coders as the next, hey, how do we reskill our labor? How do we get there? But to Kevin's point, is that just an incremental, sort of move? I mean, do we need to be thinking, bigger? So Paul, do you think, will the demand for coders be there with AI?
I'll just say something simple because I have a strong view on the topic. That coding is like math. It's like arithmetic. I think there's a huge value in training more people to understand the basics of how software works. It's like, so how often do you need to do long division? You don't need to do long division too often, but you still learn it because there's value in learning the process. And I think there's a lot of value in learning the basics of the digital age. For a broad variety of people. I think Vivienne was generally right on the number of coders we'll need, but we need far more people that understand what goes into software and how these systems are automated to think about the right way to utilize them.
Yeah, Paul, you said exactly right. So these people took 2 hours worth of coding. They aren't coders. We had HR people, finance people. But you know what? Did you ever hear someone say, oh, I don't do math? Right? That's like short code for I'm dumb. And that's why we want them to be fluent. They don't have to necessarily be coders, but they have to have fluency in all things digital. And so the point of it was to get them to stop saying, I don't do math, right? To stop saying that's for somebody else. It's abstract, it's out there. It's here and it's now and it's accessible and you can be familiar with it.
I'm sorry. So coders don't think of themselves as mathematicians. coders think of themselves as artists, linguists, mathematicians, all wrapped up. And I'd argue with Vivian that yes, you'd get, frankly, the string of command that you just gave is code, just in a different language called English, right? And if you think of it as a linguistic problem and a bunch of different ways to achieve that exact same communication. If you asked a bunch of very high-level coders that said there's a lot of different ways to achieve that. There are different languages to achieve it. There's different ways to express it, and the expressions are quite different. So that creativity, I think, and this is where I think you end up saying there's a difference between the way AI is going to be applied, is there's still a ton of creativity in things that you can apply AI to, which is why my own personal bias is that combination of keeping that human creativity level, that in our case, interaction with somebody, or the beauty of somebody being able to explore a different way to define or express something, isn't something that is going to be done by necessarily AI or a machine anytime soon. And it's sort of the comments you made earlier, where somebody said, why would you? This was a gentleman in the audience who said, why would you have an AI reproduce something that a human already does? And that expression and that creativity is something I think is going to be more difficult to capture through AI than imagine today.
I believe that coding is one of the most complete forms of visual art out there. Most business leaders today, it's so foreign to them because the technology is driving their business strategy, and that's the piece that they don't understand. But the coders visualize the problem more holistically than somebody that's been in the business for 30 years.
Agreed.
They're still selling a product.
I mean, it's just like somebody saying, I don't spell. I don't do art. Really, it's just that you don't have any fundamental understanding of something, and that's not.
Was that because I'm from Tennessee? You used I can't spell. That was.
You have teeth, though.
I know.
So,
We have a question down here, Ken.
Ford, I can't help but comment on this conversation. It's fabulous.
Well, you have the mic, so you can.
That's right. So, and I have to pile on because, as a coder myself, I have to tell you, it's kind of like poetry. Because not all coding is the same. And quite frankly, I don't even like the term coding because I think of it as sort of engineering or art or weaving a tapestry and creating a story. It's like the difference between speaking and writing poetry, right?
Agreed.
And so, but what my question was before this great conversation started was, I was watching TV one day and it struck me that the whole field of marketing that comes at people in this sort of blast of uninformed information when we're listening to the radio or watching TV is in a very limited way taking advantage of this tsunami of technology and machine learning and artificial intelligence and knowing the audience and being tailored and the kinds of things that we do online on our computers. And so I guess my question to you guys is the broader question of the whole phenomenon or the whole area of marketing. And have you and your companies given any thought to, or could you share any stories of ways you've applied technology and machine learning and artificial intelligence and data and analytics to redesign and reimagine the art and science and the field of reaching the right customer with the right message and streamlining the task of marketing, which seems to be somewhat still in the dark ages in some companies?
There is I'll comment real quickly. There are so many tools that are supplied by third parties today that can actually allow you to apply AI and machine learning to your marketing, where you can actually use Convertro as an example of a company that helps you actually understand where people came from at the top of your funnel, at what point did they convert, where did they go when they landed, and then you can compare that to other top of funnel mechanisms, whether for my company, whether it was TV, whether it was NASCAR, whether it was sponsorship, and see where they came in. And I frankly don't understand the science of how they apply the algorithms that make the determination of where they came from, but I can tell you it works. It's accurate. When we're looking at where customers come in and how they convert, we know what the acquisition cost of NASCAR is by 1,000 people versus TV and 1,000 people, and versus I buy an NFL game or I buy the Super Bowl and what that looks like. And because we actually do funnel analytics all the way down to the time when somebody purchases, and we know what the ARPU is off of somebody who's coming in from a NASCAR race or coming in from a TV commercial that we did. And that's all done through, frankly, some of our own analytics and then using good mechanisms to read and ingest it and digest it. And then third parties that are doing it as a service and doing a pretty magnificent job, and competitively against each other, you can actually get a number of bids on these things at different levels of the funnel.
I'll give you my 2 cents. I think when you put the confines around your question just around marketing, it becomes narrow in its own right. And what Blake just talked about was just fundamental intelligence and taking action upon the analytics. And I think most companies don't fundamentally leverage they study the insights, but they don't have this actionable accountability DNA within the company. They think, I presented the information. Well, who cares? Who fundamentally cares if you're not going to change something? So Cisco has a security portfolio that stops 20 billion attacks per year. 20 billion, and that number grows every single day. So 2 weeks ago when there was the DDoS attack, we didn't blip at all because we're studying all of those trends and we're literally looking at how it affects every single customer of ours, of which 80% of the world's network is running on it. And we're studying that all the way back through the product introduction, which then feeds our marketing activities. It's not just narrow around the marketing, it's across the entirety of the company that we're now applying that actionable accountability, which goes back to people like yourself, which is how do you alter the code? Because if you're not altering that code, you're not altering learning.
And, again, it's interesting, we were talking a little on the phone, a lot of this digital transformation, we've talking about companies, older companies that need to adapt. But we also have a lot of people here that represent digital native companies that have come up through digital. And, would love to hear sort of like, had you been the chief product officer at Yahoo? Yahoo has obviously been in the news, and we talk about companies transforming. I mean, where did maybe Yahoo go wrong? What did it not, which trends did it miss? Where did we see sort of them not being able to transform?
That's a tough one. And it's 2020 hindsight, so it's hard to say. To become a scale internet company today, I'm just going to posit, you can't just do it strictly on media. You actually have to do it on top of a platform. The number of platforms that exist today are pretty few at scale. Facebook I'd call a platform. Amazon's actually a platform. Certainly Google's a platform. Microsoft has some platforms that are developer platforms, pretty large scale. Mm-hmm. And I think what ended up happening was that there was a conundrum between, are we a media company, a platform company, a technology company, and how are we going to make those investments? And I think you have to either weigh in on one side or the other, and I don't think that happened. So you end up walking across the top of the fence of, I fall on one side, I'm a platform and a technology company, I fall on the other, I'm media. I think there was a time that Yahoo had an opportunity to say, we're a publishing platform, we're an advertising platform, we're a search platform, and we're going to double down on that versus media. And I think that decision, and there are a number of times that decision could have been made and had been made, or hadn't, and just never actually spent the effort to say, we're going to be a platform, we're going to scale this thing out, we're going to actually take the media that we do today and we're going to make that not necessarily the number one thing we're doing, but we're going to put our media on top of the platform and make that available to anybody else who wants to publish on us. Same kind of signal strength you get with advertising. For those of you who see brand advertising and you see a pair of shoes follow you around the internet or golf clubs or whatever it was you were searching for to buy, and then you go to another site and holy crap, there's an ad and it's got that thing in it. Happen to any of you?
Yep.
All the time? Okay, well, so that technology can be used for content as well and could have been made available to Bonnier and Rodale and Condé Nast and every other publisher on the planet. Mm-hmm. And Yahoo had some of the best tech for that and just never pursued it as a publisher.
So again, it comes down to the people making decisions, right? So we're still not, we still have to weigh these decisions and leadership has to make these changes. Lorraine, we talk a lot about these people who have been in organizations for many years, and they are sometimes resistant to that change, right? Resistant to making decisions that may compromise products that they have been responsible for, or lines of business that they have grown. I mean, how are you seeing sort of the executives, adapting to that change? Are they willing? And the ones who aren't, what do you do within a big organization?
Sure. I mean, nobody likes change, even positive change. I know that over 35 years, so you kind of have to sneak up on them sometimes a little bit. I always tell the folks, if you're going to come in with a new idea, there's something about that, no matter how good it is, that invalidates the people who are already there. Yeah. It just does. And you need to understand that the day you walk in that door, they want to know, like, why are you here? Are you going to take credit for the work I've done? Do you think you're smarter than me? Especially if you've got somebody who's been with the company, domain expertise, imagine 30 years. Young, fresh kid walks in with a bright idea. There's something invalidating about that. So I think the first thing you have to do is it's culture change. It's to say that we are going to honor, we are going to promote, we are going to award new generation leaders, no matter how old they are, whatever generation they come from. The new gen thinking is a culture change. It's more horizontal. It's more tolerant of risk and failure, not big, massive failures, but small failures so that you experiment. That's the leader of the future. And so you don't do that overnight. You don't just say, everybody, we've changed our minds. We are no longer just domain experts. You have to be this as well. But you have to build that. You have to show that through all things cultural. It's language, it's traditions, it's what you honor, it's what you reward, it's who you promote, it's how they talk, who shows up, who gets to show up. So those are the kinds of things, you always have to start with culture. I'd love to say there's an easier way out of this, but there isn't, because change is really, really hard. And then I think sharing the glory. Let those people have some success that have been recalcitrant, who've been resistant to change. Let them discover something. And then you'll have the best apostles in the world, because frankly, we have really smart people. There isn't anybody around who's been there for 30 years or has great domain expertise that's a dope, right? They're really smart. They'd like to learn. So teach. Sometimes it's reverse mentoring. And if done in the right way, I think can be really effective. And you can move a whole organization that way.
I think we had another question back here.
Hi, Michael Solomon from 10X Management. So there's been a lot of talk about change, and both change in management style, change in technology, change in the labor force. But one of the things that I haven't heard, or maybe I've missed it, over the last 24 hours is what we're going to do about all the displacement that's going to occur. I mean, I'm sort of surprised I haven't heard anybody speaking of universal basic income or any other proposed solution, because teaching people to code is great, and I think there are some people that can learn, but from what I've read and learned, there's an aptitude, and you can brute force it to a degree, but you can't take every person and turn them into a great engineer. Some of them are just born that way. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, as you look at this and you see the disruption that the technology is going to bring within your companies, what are we going to do?
Well, I'll start, and it's not necessarily within Cisco, but if I use an example, across Latin America, we estimate that there's 450,000, we're going to be short 450,000 network engineers in the next 5 years, which means you don't just find them. You have to alter the education process. So Cisco has actually started what they call country digitization acceleration, where we're literally investing in countries because we're putting money around altering the education system. And so we're looking at this where we're starting apprenticeships within the company to alter education, but we're also altering education within countries, because if you let those countries fall behind in these CDA efforts, you're talking about deterioration of economies. And it's part of your question. And so I think that large institutions like are represented up here and across the United States and everywhere have both a social and a fiduciary responsibility to put their innovation to work, and not only in their labor force, but also how they're going to build to ensure that that happens. Internally, when we're altering our portfolio, we're looking very clearly at how we're altering the education of our people. This is not about just, because what I see all the time, people start when they, like, and I'll tell you firsthand, is when I came into Cisco, everybody was saying, what salesperson makes it? I'm like, you have no idea what a salesperson makes it till we alter how the company runs. When we alter the company, these people are going to go through this learning curve. You're going to rebrand, you're going to reskill, you're going to re-educate these people. If you just treat it like you rip off the Band-Aid, then you alienate the people. This is part of the question earlier. You have to create practitioners while you evolve. And I think large companies can do an enormous amount of good on a social scale by investing in the future.
I'll just, go ahead.
I think that's exactly right. I think the initiatives like that Cisco can do are fantastic. And I think I think the issue you said, I think is the elephant in the room, so to speak, on a lot of the technology change ahead. And there's things within companies we can do. So as an example, we have a part of our business is a 100,000 person business process outsourcing business where we automated 17,000 of those 100,000 roles, so 70% of the roles in a little over a year. And we, at the same time, grew the business in the double digits, and we're able to repurpose all those people into higher value and different roles to support growth of the business. So we automated 17,000 roles, needed even more people, and we're able to grow the business. And to the extent you can solve the equation like that, it's great, but that won't always work for all companies. So I think then you get to the investments that I think we need to make as businesses in all sorts of different education and retraining initiatives, from K through 12 into workforce retraining. And I think there's a lot more to do that we're going to need to address. And I think a good discussion to keep picking up its economy and other forums on the kind of policy and government and business type of collaboration we're going to need to make sure that we have the right mechanisms. The universal basic wage or minimum wage, I think Switzerland just voted it down. It's kind of controversial in a lot of countries. I think, to me, it doesn't really solve the problem because people are going to accept that wage for a certain amount of time and then be unhappy again because it doesn't address purpose and meaning and other issues that I think will be lacking. So I think we've got a bigger issue to solve than just the financial issue around the minimum wage, and that's what we need to talk more about.
So this is going to feel like a contrarian view. The vision at our company is radically shifting the global economy toward life-fulfilling independent ventures. And the reason it's that is because we see automation actually displacing a whole bunch of workers. A lot of these people are my customers today. And before they were displaced, they came to us and they started actually buying digital things to hedge the fact that they thought they were going to get laid off. That's why we're pretty resilient to ups and downs in the economy, as just being somebody who has cycling tens of millions of customers through our back end. And what folks are doing is they're trying to find something that they find very fulfilling in life to be able to say, I'm going to go do that, and then I'm not going to care nearly as much about how much I'm making as long as I can provide for my family, or it provides better connectivity between me and my community. The guy who washes windows at my house is a customer of mine, and he's a super good dude. He doesn't find, newsflash, he doesn't find life fulfillment in washing windows. But he goes to his parent-teacher conferences on Friday. He doesn't work for the man anymore. He works for himself. He brings his son to work. He does all these things that really matter to him. And I don't posit that everybody in the world is going to be able to work for themselves, not work for a smaller business, but you're going to see a shift of giant companies that are automating a lot of stuff. You've heard it from some of us up here that, we're automating things and people are getting displaced. They got to do something. They got to go somewhere, and some will be able to retool, and others will be able to provide tools or technology that allow them to get customers, keep them, and go do something that matters to them. And I think that's a little bit contrarian. In my company, we're such a small company, we don't have hundreds of thousands of people to displace.
Right.
Can I just add one thing real quickly? I don't think any business leader is looking at automation as displacement of people. I think there's an evolution of technology that will drive that. But the business leaders that I talk to recognize that they have to find creative roles for where people are going. You heard Lorraine talk about it. It is front and center in every single discussion that I have. When I was just in Germany, there was a company that had 268,000 employees. It's right up front in their thinking. They want to make sure that those people have something to do in a meaningful way. But the challenge is it's a radically different business model. So I think this is a paradigm in the technology world like we've never seen before. And you're having to look at how to manage, how to build a business, because when you build a business, you put people at work. But you have to manage through the evolution of what technology is doing. And I applaud efforts where they begin to look at the empowerment of roles. But I don't want it to think that business leaders are looking at automation as just a replacement of people, because I don't see that.
Quite the contrary. We're looking at trying to free those people up to do more important things. We are resource constraint.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we don't have an abundance of resource. We wish we could hire 100,000 more people and still keep the profit levels we have. Those two things don't go together, so that's ours to manage. So if we have a finance guy who just graduated from Notre Dame, and we've got him doing this mindless job, my God, that guy could be thinking about commercial finance for the Egyptian government to buy a power plant. That's where we'd rather him spend his time than doing the T accounts. So I think I wouldn't think about it in a micro level. Your bigger question is the bigger question, for sure. And I think you guys answered that really well. But I think inside of a company, it's retooling your people.
Yeah. Well, right. And I think the
That's a
issue,
harder question.
at the macro level, the issue is maybe even larger, where if automation is giving a competitor of mine, let's say I run a giant business, automation is giving a competitor of mine an advantage, and so when they file in their quarterlies, they have better earnings growth, and I'm looking at mine, and mine's not as good, and I'm trying to figure out how to get my earnings to match, and automation's going to do it. And I know most of my cost is in OpEx and people. I mean, you're seeing this play out. People are, getting laid off because, earnings aren't making the number. You're getting measured at the top line. You're getting measured at EBITDA expansion. And if you think you can get your EBITDA expansion up and your top line's not growing as fast, people start getting taken out of the business because that's where the biggest amount of cost is. And that, unfortunately, is a reality, I think, in a lot of these businesses, and it displaces people, to your point. And so how do you end up?
But, I think as Kevin said, the leaders understand that they have a responsibility at least to try, right? And I think it's going to take the companies, the smarter companies that are able to reskill, relocate those people within the organizations. We had hosted an event in Detroit for the last couple of years, and we continue to see similar numbers. You mentioned an 8% unemployment rate, but 80,000 open job recs.
Yeah.
So there's a mismatch of skills, and how do we reskill some of that labor? Obviously, at the pace that technology is moving, that will continue to happen more, and there'll be more displacement. Josh, we have a quick one.
I just wanted to offer an idea that was born from last year's Techonomy that addresses the last three questions on how do you do marketing better, how do you overcome cultural change, and what about displacement? And the idea that was born from last year's Techonomy was this notion that the real function of this deluge of data, the real function is to activate the human computer, that the human brain is the other half of the global data infrastructure, because there are two algorithms that take place here that really don't work in a synthetic computer: curiosity and intuition. Curiosity is an algorithm. The output of that is, I ought to look at this more. This is worth my time. If I explore this, something good's going to happen. Intuition is an algorithm. The output of that is, I ought to take action. I ought to do something here. Lorraine, you talked about using AI to take care of the mind-numbing work that's there. 85% of all the data you could look at is so irrelevant and not helpful to the decision you're about to make. But if you use AI to filter out what's obviously not helpful, serve up and visualize what could be helpful, then you don't need an engineering degree to work with data. You can trigger the algorithms that everybody was born with. And I just wanted to say that's an idea that came out of last year's Techonomy, that we're in a dysfunctional relationship with technology and data because we expect it to do the things that we ought to do, and we're letting it automate the things that we got it wrong. So I just wanted to throw that out there as an idea that was born, and say that as a very small company, we made a huge bet on that last year, and that has borne out. We've seen Fortune 100 companies change the way that they let liberal arts majors work with data with amazing results.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, if you listen to Lorraine's answer, she didn't say the person was a true data scientist. She said they were applying data science to analytics. And when I was in DC, I was sitting there talking to this young woman so we do this with threat detection where we literally sit in rooms where people are bidding on upcoming hacking, where they're bidding on, like, I'm going to go take this company down, I'm going to go steal this. And we watch where they're going. And I said, what did you study? She went to Penn State, and I said, what did you study? She goes, home ec. And I'm like, where'd you get your master's in bioengineering? She was so diverse. And I think that's a reflection of the talent that's coming out of universities. It's part of your question. We need to put diversity at work. And that's what we're trying to do, is put diversity at work. So, because you're right, it's not a replacement of one, but you have to rethink the work that you're trying to do.
And when you talk about that curiosity, I mean, one of the things, I think I talked to many of you about was, the difference between entrepreneurs and people within big companies. And entrepreneurs are, sort of naturally curious. They're attacking problems slightly differently. We talk about engagement with the startup community. How are some of your companies looking to engage with those entrepreneurs, with the startup communities, to sort of start to understand a little bit more about how you could bring some of that DNA into the organization?
It's a big priority for us right now. We've launched a business called Accenture Ventures specifically to invest in and work with the startups and venture capital firms, et cetera. And so in part, the reason for doing that wasn't to create a fund and become a VC. It was to try to match all the innovation that's happening there better to the large enterprise and provide kind of a bridge maker function to curate the best innovation, by domain or industry or type of technology, and be able to, help, get that innovation to big companies faster. And we see a lot of demand for that. And it's, I think, we need more mechanisms to do that quicker. You see a lot of companies setting up their corporate VC funds. That's the right answer and a good answer for many companies. In other cases, they're trying to build relationships. We think there's an opportunity for almost like this, what we call a kind of innovation as a service type of capability to better bridge some of those small companies to the bigger companies. And I think the advance we're seeing in some of the thinking is, I think initially a lot of bigger companies saw those companies as threats. And I think what we're seeing is a kind of a different view that no, those are opportunities, and there's a huge opportunity for better partnerships with the innovators in smaller companies.
We've done the same thing. GE Ventures, we have a group that, works and experiments. It's been greatly successful.
We have a $2 billion fund that we invest. We sort of use it to look around the corner. We don't buy anything. Very seldom do we buy a company that we put money in. We're just using it to look around the corner. We've entirely re-engineered our 25,000 engineers. We have begun to infuse open source in across our business because, why alienate good thinking? Give them an opportunity to participate with our $6 billion that we invest every year. They don't have it, so use it. It's beneficial to creativity. And then internally, we actually have created an innovation challenge where our employees can actually come up with ideas. And I think the most important thing that we've done in the fifth is we actually take engineers that are at threat of leaving and we say, you think you can take us down? We'll sponsor you as a startup within the company. And when we do that, we don't let them work in teams larger than 25. They have to figure out how to take and leverage a small team to literally challenge us. And what they find is they become better leaders. They had good ideas, but now they have to lead back across the entirety of the engineering team, and they become better contributors.
Yeah.
One other thing that we've done in that vein is people will come to the CEOs and say, I've got a great product, we need $1 billion of funding. We need $2 billion. A jet engine's $2 billion, right? It's like, maybe we're not going to jump off that bridge for $2 billion. So what we're going to do is we're going to give you $100,000. You're going to go do what we call fast work. So go out, test your minimally viable product, get some leap of faith assumptions, get them verified or validated. If they aren't good, then pivot, come back, and then we'll give you $1 million if you prove that one out. Then we call it a growth board. And not every business is using it in the exact same way, but most businesses have one. And so now it's not a matter of I show up and say, hey, listen, I got this great idea, give me $1 billion. It's, I got a great idea, I need to be an entrepreneur. I got to earn my keep for several milestones, just like you would with a VC. And it has really changed the thinking. And it doesn't make us more incremental. We still have that big dream of the big thing that cost $1 billion, but it's how do I get there? It's a series of small experiments rather than this one big leap of faith that unfortunately could cost you $500 million and you find out, oops,
Right.
Wrong thing.
So we only have about another minute, and we talked a lot about AI. Obviously, at the event, we're talking a lot about IoT. Would love to hear just from each of you, if you were to pick sort of the tech trend that's going to transform, many of these people's businesses. If we, again, exclude the two we've focused on, what do you think people should be paying attention to that maybe that they're not currently?
For me, I think it's pooling of data. that is owned by me, by the individual, where I have records at Kaiser Permanente, I have records with Fitbit, I have records with Nike, I have a whole bunch of telemetry data on my performance, my body. I don't own any of it, and it's locked up. And then I have all these data pools that are on Amazon and all these other places, and I don't own any of it, right? And it's always going to be separate. And I think I think a number portability, my telephone number is really the only thing I own, and I can decide where I move that and how I take it with me, or if I take it with me. I can't do that with my other data, and I think going forward, I think it's both a governmental problem and an industry problem because the economics work against it. I want to own it. I want to be able to transport it. I want to be able to use it and permission people into it. And I think that is going to be a relatively transformative thing in the next decade.
I've been struck by the fact that there's been so little discussion on blockchain and distributed ledger architectures. We're seeing huge advances in most of my daily conversations with companies across not just fintech but other industries about blockchain applications that are really transformative to their business models, not just different ways of doing things. So I think there's a tremendous potential there.
I think data privacy is going to be a huge thing. I just had the opportunity to be at Harvard Medical School, where they're doing all kinds of things on data analytics, but the issue of privacy is front and center. And I think the next generation of people say, well, I don't care that my data is not private. I don't care if anybody knows I have diabetes. Right? And that's a very different thing when you look at, and that is generational. So I think that's going to be something to watch, and how do we think about that, and what policies and regulations persist around that?
I'm going to put the last two comments together. You're going to see EU move to where every individual has a digital identity directly in line with blockchain. So you're going to see the individual be a commerce route to market all by themselves. But the overwhelming thing that I think ties this all together is security. When you become an individual, when you wear watches like this, the point of entry around security is radical. So I think that there is no IoT strategy without pervasive security.
Well, give the panelists a hand and thank you for joining the conversation. Really appreciate it. We're going to take a short break. We're going to be back in here for the afternoon sessions at 2:45. One thing I was asked to remind is everyone should be needing to wear their badges this afternoon. We will obviously have to increase security as the day goes on, so please make sure that everyone has their badges. So thanks again.
We got Zuckerberg and his entourage of security guys.